this. Let's talk about the steps that you take then to process DNA samples.
First, I'll examine the actual item of evidence in the lab, basically looking for semen stains or blood stains most of the time. Then I'll take a small cutting of that stain, put that cutting in a small plastic test tube, and add some chemicals to that, heat it up, and that breaks the cells open, releasing the DNA into a solution that we can use. Once I have the DNA into solution, I'll do what's called quantitation. And quantitation tells us how much DNA is there. The testing we do right now at the lab requires a very specific amount of DNA, a target of approximately 1 nanogram of DNA. So that's why we need to quantitate the samples before we amplify the DNA that is there. The next step in the process is
And then can I ask a question relative to the topic of quantification? So if there is not a sufficient sample, then does the analysis essentially stop there?
Once we start our DNA process, if we do a quantitation, we usually carry it all the way through. Other crime labs in the country, they will stop it if the quantitation is telling them there's not a sufficient amount or there's no DNA there. We are working towards developing that and implementing that, but we are not there yet.
All right. So then after the quantification stage, describe then what's involved in amplification.
Amplification is taking the DNA that's there and making many copies of it. If you imagine a copy machine starting with one piece of paper and then you hit the copy button about 1,000,000 times. That's kind of what we're doing with the amplification process in DNA. We need enough DNA that can be detected by our analysis instrument.
All right. And then once you've gone through the amplification process, then what's the next step before you start the process of comparison?
We load the amplified DNA onto an analysis instrument, and that instrument measures differences in lengths of fragments of DNA. Basically, we're looking at 21 different locations in a person's DNA on their chromosomes, looking for DNA factors there. And the instrument, most of the fragments are between 60 and 460 base pairs long. And there's a laser in the instrument that can measure differences in length as the DNA travels through a capillary or a small glass tube and passes through the detection window where the laser shines on it and takes all the measurements for us.
Now, Mr. Smith, speak to this particular topic, recognizing that we get half of our DNA from our father and half of our DNA from our mother. I pose the question, is DNA unique to each of us as individuals?
If you look at enough different locations, most people are going to have a different DNA profile. The exception would be identical twins. They're going to have the exact same DNA profile.
Okay, all right. And then once you have developed areas of the DNA to test, then how would you compare DNA of an individual to any locations of items of evidence for the presence of DNA to determine if there is a match?
I will have a printout of the crime scene evidence, the DNA profile developed from a crime scene, and then I'll have another piece of paper with a profile printed out of potential or alleged victims and suspects in cases, and I will do a side-by-side comparison to see if I can either match or make an elimination between the samples.
That being said, I want to direct your attention to a death investigation, specifically arising out of a report of a child identified as Breasia Terrell, who was reported missing in July of 2020, and then we had recovery of remains on March 22nd of 2021. Did Rick Ron of the Iowa DCI reach out to the DCI laboratory to assist in identifying skeletal remains that had been found and then collected on March 23rd of 2021 out north of Clinton? And I know you probably aren't aware of the area, but did he contact the DCI lab to help us identify who those remains belonged to?
Yes.
All right. Now, did you perform a number of different analyses after the recovery of those skeletal remains?
Yes.
As far as your first involvement in this case, what were you tasked with?
First, the body had been found, and they asked the DCI lab to assist in the identification of the body. So the lab received a bone from the remains, and I was assigned with trying to develop a DNA profile from that bone.
Your Honor, may the record reflect that I'm showing counsel what's been marked as State's Exhibit 57. May I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
I'm handing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 57 for purposes of identification. I'd like for you to look at that report and tell me if you recognize that report.
Yes, this was the first DNA report I wrote for this case.
Okay. How is that document captioned at the top in the middle?
Official report of Iowa Department of Public Safety, DCI Criminalistics Laboratory.
Is the lab case number attached to your report that was assigned to this investigation and submissions that came in to the DCI for analysis?
Yes, the lab case number was 2020-16859.
And as far as varying reports that were generated by the DCI, what report number is assigned to this report?
Report 1.
What date did you complete your findings and author this report?
March 30th, 2021.
And does your report identify what type of report this is?
Yes, this is a DNA report.
And is your signature attached to this document as the criminalist who did the DNA analysis?
Yes.
Your Honor, the State would move to introduce State's Exhibit 57.
No objection. Exhibit 57 will be admitted.
May I publish, Your Honor?
You may.
All right. In looking at State's Exhibit 57, what we're doing, Mr. Schmidt, is just trying to give everybody a perspective of what came in so that we know what items of evidence that you were working with. Do you have three separate sections showing three different submissions that came in?
Yes.
All right. The first entry, give us the information as to date and what individual with what agency had submitted items and what those items consisted of.
Okay, on March 25th of 2021, Mark Bethel with the State Medical Examiner's Office submitted a shirt, shorts, a bra, and a box containing a left femur bone.
All right. For our next section, what was our submission date for the second item of evidence, and who was responsible for that submission?
On March 25th of 2021, Mark Bethel from the State Medical Examiner's Office submitted an item containing tissue from the left leg.
All right. And are we talking about the earlier submission of the box of left femur? Would that tissue have come from that?
The tissue came from the left leg.
Gotcha.
It was in a small plastic test tube.
Okay. And then for our third submission, what is the date? Who made that submission, and what item was that?
On March 26, 2021, Evan Obert with the Davenport Police Department submitted the known buccal swab from Aisha Langford.
All right. Let's talk about the known buccal swab of Aisha Langford. We're going to go back in our education so that we can set our perspective. I would represent to you that Aisha Langford is the mother of Breasia Terrell. Now, what is a buccal swab?
A buccal swab is basically a cotton-tipped swab, basically a Q-tip, except it just has cotton at one end of the swab, not both. Now, to get a known DNA sample from someone, an officer, a detective, or a sheriff's deputy, we'll take that swab and rub it on the inside of a person's mouth against their cheek or their cheek wall. There are a lot of cells present in that area, and that's usually plenty of DNA for us that we can develop a DNA profile from that swab.
When the swab from Aisha Langford came into the DCI laboratory, did you, in fact, develop a DNA profile for Miss Langford?
Yes, I did.
All right. Now, why did you need to develop a DNA profile from Miss Langford?
In order to make a comparison to the unidentified remains that were found in this case, we do have a DNA database that we have access to. It's a national DNA database, but it contains DNA from crime scenes and convicted offenders. I could, if we didn't know who the person's mom was, we had no idea who the body was, I could put the profile from the body into the database and see if there was a match somewhere. But most of the time, we do ask for known samples from the decedent's possible parents or their children in order to make a comparison. We basically don't want an innocent person's DNA.
Okay, I have been waiting here with my Q-tip, Katherine Lizardo, because I have buckle high, taking the cheek, right? And then they're going to take the swab. Now it's a bigger one and it's longer and it's got a little wooden stick and more cotton. And they're going to put it back in the test tube, and then they're going to put it in a solution, and they're going to amplify my DNA. And that's what they did to the mom, okay? That's why she came in. Because they knew that there was probably one body missing. They knew from the bones that this was a child. They have the femurs. They know it's not an adult. There's one body missing. There's one girl missing. And so they kind of know who it is. That's why they get the mom. So he's got a femur, and then he's got shirts, shorts, and a bra. Now, on the shirt and shorts, and this is a great picture because, you know, we always talk about the decedent, the person who died, but this was a live human being. This was a child, Breasia Terrell. She had a mother. This is just a horrible case. But on the shirt, shorts, and bra, I'm sure they're not looking for her DNA. They may be looking for somebody else. Who would they be looking for? This is anticipation of his testimony.
Well, they'll be looking for the DNA of the defendant here to see whether or not he handled her body afterwards. And if they do find his DNA, then they can tie the defendant to Bree's death. This expert, he is basically testifying on one thing, which is confirming that the skeletal remains and tissue they found were of Bree, the 10-year-old. And like you said, it's very heartbreaking to see and think about what this 10-year-old girl had to go through, especially after her death. Her body, they found her remains almost a year after she was murdered. That's why they needed DNA testing, because they could not identify this person at all.
Yeah, and the medical examiner, you see the team gets the femur, gets the tissue out of the femur, which is why they're sending both the tissue sample and the femur to it. Now, Michael Bryan, I know, probably would have a bone lying around here because he normally does Friday and is normally our person who does these demonstrative exhibits. I'm taking this, Michael, away from you. But this is a very serious matter, because if they can find any kind of DNA, what do you think the likelihood would be when the clothes had been left out, and this body was found the year after? What do you think the likelihood is?
It's very unlikely that they would find a DNA. Similar to the expert testimony of the expert who was testifying before him about bleach. It's been almost a year, and things get degraded, such as DNA and sunlight, water, and she was found in a pond. And there were testimonies beforehand by witnesses saying that, and experts saying that her bones, her remains, had evidence of being chewed on by animals in the pond. So there's a lot of DNA, maybe of animals there mixed with her DNA. So to be able to see if the defendant's DNA is there is highly unlikely, but I think would not have that much weight to begin with, because there are other circumstantial evidence that will show that the defendant is likely guilty here.
And for our viewers who are avid crime advocates, the reason why they do this cheek swab, because you get all the saliva, you get all the cheek cells that are shedding, easy to get DNA. The only cell in the whole body that doesn't have DNA, and I know Katherine knows this, is the red blood cell. So that's why we do the cheek swabs. Stay with us for more helpful hints when you get to solve your crime, because believe it or not, crime is all around us, and this case demonstrates how easy it is to become a victim and how terrible it is and how good the justice system is when we convict those who are guilty. Stay with us.